Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. I'm Stephen Keller at LumenVox, and we're here talking today about the LumenVox release of version 12.0. This is one of the regular release webinars that we do, and we're going to talk about all the new features in the 12.0 build. Obviously there's a lot of different changes in there, so I'm not going to focus on every single one. I'm going to try and talk about perhaps the most interesting or most meaningful changes. So we'll go through, as you can see here, a list of some things I've decided to highlight, including new logging controls, some improved performance that we've seen with some changes we've made under the hood, some enhancements to the dashboard, some improvements to secure context mode, and also we like to really talk about any changes to things for previous users. Obviously, if you're upgrading, we want to make sure that you know what has changed, what you need to be aware of when upgrading. So there have been some deprecated functions in the API, as well as a few changes to some default behaviors I think you should know about. Finally, we'll go ahead and have a question-and-answer session afterward. So, just getting started. Like I mentioned before, this is going to be a discussion about the changes in 12.0. These webinars are fairly technical, so we do intend that they are going to be a relatively technical audience. Anyone is welcome to attend, but obviously, I'm going to be talking in some detail about these changes, configuration files, the like, so expect you have some familiarity with LumenVox. Again, this is mainly for people who are upgrading. If you're brand new to LumenVox, you're welcome to obviously watch and participate, but it may or may not be super meaningful for you. And again, we're going to try and focus on the things that have changed between 12.0 and the previous release, 11.3. Obviously, 12.0 is a new major release. It's the first release in the 12.x series. We tend to put out between 2 and 4 sort of what we call important upgrades per year. The last major release was 11.3.100, which was about, I think, 3 or 4 months ago. And the 11.x series is about a year old. So we tend to increment the major version number about once a year. So obviously, if you haven't used LumenVox, from version 10 or something like that, there are a bunch of changes in the 11.x series. You might want to go check out the release notes. This is the link. If you go to lumenvox.com/knowledgebase, under the installation section, there is full release notes that will go back for every single release, going back to practically the dawn of time. So I do encourage everyone to always check that for the sort of full official list of changes. And we've already had one question, obviously, but feel free to just use the webinar questions section if you want to ask me any questions as we go along, and I'll try and answer them as I can or save them for the end. But I'll also have time set aside for Q&A at the end, so you can feel free to ask me now or ask me later. And of course, if you'd like, we're easy to get a hold of. You can email me or post a question on our developer forums, and be happy to discuss things in more detail. All right, so with the preliminaries out of the way, let's talk about what people are probably most interested in, the new features here. So from my perspective, and maybe I'm biased because I do a lot of work in technical support, so I spend a lot of my time playing with LumenVox logging. But this is a feature people have asked for some amount of time, and this is to have better control over how logs work. So there's actually a new configuration file in 12.0 that did not exist previously. It's going to be called logs.conf. It'll live wherever the your configuration files live. So on Linux, it's going to be in etc LumenVox. On Windows, that'll be in program files, LumenVox, then engine config, or TTS config, or speech tuner config, depending on which product you're configuring. And logs.conf right now provides 3 different parameters. The first is max log file size, which will control how big any individual log file can grow. The default is 30 megabytes. It's got, I don't remember the exact upper cap, but it's very, very large. It's gigs and gigs and gigs or something, so as large as you would ever practically need it to be. The previous behavior was to cap all logs at 30 megs, so that's why this is the default behavior. So we haven't changed the default. If you don't touch anything, it'll more or less work the way it used to. But if you do want to have larger or smaller log files, you can set them here. I will say it's pretty useful because people who are running, say, a heavy production server would sometimes find if they turned logging verbosity up pretty high, that the logs would roll very, very quickly. So being able to increase the size of the log files can make it easier if you're trying to troubleshoot problems or work with support to figure out what's going on. Likewise, we control the number of backups that LumenVox will save off. So the traditional behavior of LumenVox was once a log file grew to 30 megabytes, we would copy that log file as the name of the log .backup. So you'd have your your media server app log, and then once it got to 30 megabytes, we would rename it to media server app .backup. At which point we'd start writing a new media server app. When that when the new media server app reached 30 megs, it would get renamed, throwing away the old backup. So at any given time, you could have a 30 meg main file and a 30 meg backup file. That would be kind of the maximum. So a total of 60 megs worth of logs. You can now control how many backups get saved off. So you can kind of control the max log file size plus the number of backups. The default is 1. So again, the default behavior won't change unless you go in here and edit it, but it will make it a little bit easier to save stuff off if you'd like. You're also going to have the ability to do what we call expanded log path. So this was a feature request from a customer, and what they had asked for was the ability to save logs off sort of by date. So by default, LumenVox will just put logs in the logs folders. In Linux, that's in var log LumenVox, and then the name of the product. In Windows, it's in program files, the installation path /logs. Well, if you turn on expanded log paths, we'll create subdirectories inside of that log directory with the date. So each day would have its own structure. Like the year will be a folder, the month would be a folder, and then each day would get its own folder. So in that case, you can really save off lots and lots of logs if you'd like. And then max log backups will apply to the number of backups in any given folder. So if you use expanded log path and a large value of max log backups, you can end up saving a very large number of logs off. But again, it can be useful. I would suggest using expanded log path somewhat carefully if you set backups to a high number, just because then you could end up taking up a lot of disk space with your logs. But assuming you've got good log management and cleanup, it shouldn't be a problem. Another big change we've made in 12.0 is going to be something that's going to be maybe not that noticeable at first glance, but we think is pretty significant. And it's part of an effort led by our engineering team. I have to give them a lot of credit. They've really been working on improving load testing and performance, particularly for the media server and the ASR server. And particularly, again, we've noticed that there were some real inefficiencies when the media server and the ASR were doing DTMF interpretations. So if you're using us to process DTMF and return an interpretation against a grammar, that was really not efficient under load. So we've made a bunch of other improvements to both of these. It's not just DTMF interpretations. It absolutely is also things like setting up sessions and doing ASR decodes. But what we've seen is on our load tests here, depending on the test, sometimes we've seen the effective port density we can put on a single server double, which is pretty significant. So we've seen that's a test that was kind of designed to target the inefficiencies that we became aware of. So it's probably the sort of best case scenario in practical terms. I wouldn't at all suggest that everyone's going to see a doubling effect across the board, but we have seen that in some scenarios. So we would suggest that you may want to go ahead and rerun any benchmarking you've done in the past with LumenVox. You may very well see, if you're using the media server and or the ASR server, we suspect that you'll see significant throughput improvements. So you can probably pretty significantly increase the number of ports you can have on a single server. And one other interesting effect here is that part of these inefficiencies were causing the media server timers to not always be completely accurate. So this would apply if you're doing things like setting the speech complete timeouts or the just total timeout, those kinds of timers, recognition start timer messages. If you're setting those things, you might have set it to maybe 1800 milliseconds. Because of these inefficiencies, we might have not resolved that timer until 2 seconds had passed. So we've gone through and we've made sure that the timers are probably much more accurate, much better resolution of them. And so you should find that if you're running and paying close attention to how long timers are taking to fire, that they're much more accurate now, which is definitely a good change. But it may change some behaviors. If, for instance, you had built an application around those inaccuracies, this may affect things, so be aware of that. We've also been enhancing the dashboards. This is something we've been trying to do in every release, is add some improvements to the dashboard. So this is obviously the web interface to managing and configuring LumenVox that we added 2 versions ago. So if you haven't seen this before, now is a good time to check it out as you upgrade to 12.0. It's all documented in the LumenVox knowledge base, of course, but we've added this release is this new monitoring tab. So here you can come in, click it, and see a bunch of information about the system that's hosting the dashboard as well as various processes on there. So we have this system performance graph, and it can show you a couple different things, including memory and CPU. And basically just over time, it'll track the amount of those things. You can see here a little legend there. It's an interactive running graph. Sort of by default, this is enabled inside of the dashboard, and it's pretty nice. If you probably lots of people already have external tools that keep track of this, but if you don't, here's a nice way to do it. What's also really useful for sure is the ability to track processes and record that and save it over time. So you'll see here there's the system performance above, and then down below is this process performance, and there's a drop-down where you can choose to toggle between various things like virtual memory and CPU time, that kind of stuff. So by default, it's going to track all of the LumenVox processes, but there's a new configuration settings in manager.conf. That's the obviously manager configuration file. That'll allow you to add other things to the process list if you'd like. So you can do things like just basically put in a comma-delimited list of process names in this process monitor list parameter. That'll let us go ahead and track any processes you specify. And we've got a link to the new dashboard documentation here that kind of goes through exactly how to use all of this. So obviously if you come into the knowledge base, lumenvox.com/knowledge base, you can go to administration, LumenVox dashboard, and then get to this link. Or we'll be posting a copy of this presentation as a PDF, so you can just click on the link in the PDF as well to get right to that page. Another nice, just sort of quality of life change to the dashboard in this release is the ability to see what languages for both ASR and TTS that you have installed. So it's actually something I was talking about with another customer this morning. As the number of TTS voices that we have has grown, it's become somewhat difficult sometimes to keep track of all the different voices you have when you upgrade it. Obviously, I'm not the normal case. I have lots and lots of LumenVox product installed on lots of different machines as I do tests and work with customers. But I know for me, when I upgrade, I have to go get a big list of all the languages I have. You can now just go into the dashboard and see what you have installed, so you can make it easy to know which packages you need to grab when you upgrade. So if you just go to the TTS or the ASR and you go to the configuration section, you'll see here at the very bottom there's a list of ASR languages installed, and there's going to be one as well for TTS languages installed. Kind of a nice-to-have feature that'll probably make upgrading a bit smoother. We've also made some changes to the secure context mode. So secure context, this is another change that came about in the 11.x series of product. It allows you to sort of suppress certain logs. But previously, secure context would suppress any ASR recognitions and any TTS syntheses while it was turned on. You can toggle it on or off either by default in the configuration files or over MRCP or the API by setting a parameter, so you can toggle it on and off for individual interactions. The common use case would be if you had a customer saying something like a credit card number. You wouldn't want that credit card number to appear in the logs, obviously, so you can go ahead and turn on secure context for this interaction, have that decode result just get suppressed so it doesn't appear in the logs. We have also expanded that to, again, this was per customer request, we thought it seemed reasonable, that you'll now see if you turn on secure context, then the contents of any grammars that you load will be suppressed, as well as grammar URIs and labels. Some customers pointed out that, yeah, that they did actually have sensitive information inside of grammars. If you're customizing grammars to include social security numbers, for instance, or credit card numbers, or any other kind of personal identifying information, well, make sure that does not get logged. We also have a Securing Sensitive Data white paper. There's a link to it here, and it's in the knowledge base. I recommend checking this out if you haven't already. It's sort of best practice recommendations for people who are either trying to get PCI or HIPAA compliance to kind of describe the various options that LumenVox has to support these compliance efforts. And just anyone who's interested in making sure that they're not inadvertently revealing sensitive information about their users could really benefit from reading that white paper. We've also gone ahead and deprecated a variety of fairly probably little used functions from the API, but anytime we deprecate something, we want to make sure everyone knows about it. We suspect probably people have not been using these for a very long time, since they were actually kind of replaced or phased out with better options a long time ago. But we did notice that these were here and probably shouldn't still be. So they've been moved to the deprecated header file. These three functions here: LDSRE, decode pitch, decode energy, and get voice channel data. We've also gone ahead and deprecated a number of properties that could be set with the set property EX function. So I'm not going to go through the whole list here, but most of this stuff is stuff that's really not super important. And obviously things like being able to set the license server host name, you can do that, of course. Obviously, just for a long time we've had a renamed version of that property. It's a little bit better. Probably this won't affect many people, but just in case, want to make sure everyone's aware of it. And obviously we would plan in a future version to remove those functions entirely out of the deprecated header, so they're no longer available at all. So if you do still have code that's using these, we suggest you change that code and update it so that you don't have problems down the line. And I also want to talk about changes to default behavior. Not actually that many this time. We've added a lot of new options, but most of the things have to be enabled in the configuration files in order to affect the actual performance of the applications. So we'll, in a second, maybe just go through the release notes and talk about some of the smaller options we have, but those aren't changed to default. Probably the biggest default change we have is that we're now, when we send results over MRCP to voice platforms that use MRCP, we encode those results according to a standard called the NLSML, the Natural Language Semantic Markup Language or something like that, Speech Markup Language, I forget. That's basically an XML blob that we send over MRCP, and previously we were not including a character encoding declaration in that XML. And we noticed it was actually causing a problem with some voice platforms when using accented characters outside of the normal ASCII set, because it looked like we were actually sending ISO 88591 encoded XML, but voice platforms, or at least one voice platform in particular, was assuming UTF-8, which was causing it trouble parsing our responses. So we are now actually we've now actually changed it to send out ISO 88591 in the XML prologue. We declare the character encoding type, which is probably a good practice. Definitely a recommended thing to do. So we're probably better complying with XML here. But if you've got a voice platform that doesn't expect this, and it may potentially cause an issue. We doubt very strongly that this will affect anyone, but it could want to call it out. You can revert it by editing our NLSML templates. I don't know if everyone's aware of that, but if we come here into the LumenVox knowledge base, we do sort of describe how to do this. Zoom in a little bit. Essentially, there's a set of what we call template files in the lang result templates directory. On Windows, it's in your installation directory, program files, LumenVox, engine, lang, result templates. In Linux, it's in etc LumenVox, lang, result templates. And these basically let you kind of control and modify the behavior, the way that we format and encode the NLSML that we send back. So you can just go ahead and basically remove this, remove the NLSML declaration. I'm sorry, the character encoding declaration from the NLSML template if you want to get rid of it. So, worth pointing out. And as I mentioned before, the media server timer should be a lot more accurate. The resolution is much better as part of our performance enhancements. We would hope that doesn't actually break anyone. I mean, hopefully it should make your applications perform the way you want them to perform. But again, worth mentioning just in case. The last thing I really want to kind of point out are some licensing changes that we've made. So it's a little bit of a weird spot for us right now because we're not ready to sort of publicly discuss all the changes, but we have kind of under the hood the ability in 12.0 to enable a new licensing mode that doesn't use the existing licensing system. That's not something you can do without talking to us, because what we're looking for right now are beta users to try using the new licensing and give us feedback. So if anyone has questions about this or is interested, please let us know. And I do want to just make sure we're not throwing away the old licensing system anytime soon, so if you are completely happy with current licensing, you don't want anything to change, don't worry about it. We're certainly not going to be forcing this on people anytime in the near future. We're being very, very cautious. This is something we've been working on internally for about 2 years now. We just want to make sure that we have it being very flexible and that it still accommodates everyone's needs. The real point of the new licensing is to do a lot of different things. Maybe first and foremost, we want to make sure that we can offer more flexible licensing models. So obviously, in the past, we've set up custom deals with people who wanted to do things like bursting or per minute decodes, instead of just buying licenses or paying for subscription licenses on a per month basis to do other more interesting kind of options. And obviously the existing licensing model, which just thinks of licenses as I have a port, it's in use, and I have X number of ports, that's so many, and each license corresponds to one port, doesn't really fit well with that. There's no good way for us to say license and allow you to pay per minute of use that you use. This just doesn't really work very well. So we really want to make a more flexible model. We also want to make a model that's sort of more in tune with reality of 2013. The current licensing system came out, I believe, in 2006. And in 2006, it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but things like virtual machines and cloud computing were around, but certainly not prevalent like they are today. So our very hardware-based licensing system that expects to be tied to a hardware profile on a given server doesn't necessarily fit everyone's use case today. So if you're installing on a cluster or a bunch of virtualized machines, suddenly having to set up hardware information and make deployments to the website doesn't always make a ton of sense. So we want to make sure it's something that's a little bit more flexible and more responsive and adaptive. So that's the kind of stuff that we're looking at in terms of the kind of functional requirements we have. So if anyone is in those kinds of environments and has had any kind of heartburn from our licensing system, please let us know. We would love to get your feedback and talk with you and see what your particular use cases are and how we could help improve things. And if you're interested in being a beta customer, please let us know. You can email support@lumenvox.com, and we'll be happy to take a look and talk with you. All right. So, is there any questions? I know there's not. We don't really have the attendance today that we've had before. I apologize. We didn't have a ton of time to get people notice. We didn't want to do this next week because it's the Thanksgiving holiday in the United States, and so a lot of people we felt would be unavailable, including us here at LumenVox. People are going to be taking off for the holiday, so we didn't want to push it off too long either. The release just came out on Tuesday, so we only had a couple of days of notice, unfortunately. But if anyone does have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. I'm not sure if people will, though, just because not a ton of people in today's webinar. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the questions panel, so I'm just going to go ahead and move on. I will say if you have any other questions or maybe you don't want to ask something publicly, we're happy to have an offline technical discussion with you. You can go ahead and email support@lumenvox.com or give us a call. Happy to chat. We've also got, I don't know if everyone's aware of this, a new developer website that's focused on technical information. So if you come in here to developer.lumenvox.com, you can check out a bunch of interesting, fun stuff here, including white papers, sample code, training videos, and the like. We've also got a developer blog. If you just come here and get to it as well, if you go to Engage and then blog, you see we've got some information about 12.0, and we posted a preview of 12.0 several weeks ago, other kinds of things there. We've also got developer forums. You can just come down here and go to forum, check it out, and we've got some pretty good discussions going on in some of these forums. So if you've got questions or feedback, feel free to go post comments or new forum posts there. If you've got problems getting things configured or getting working, that's a perfectly acceptable place of doing it as well. And finally, the release notes, again, always the best place to go. You can kind of come here and see the full list of changes. So where we kind of, every minor change gets documented pretty much. So you'll see here, there's a lot of stuff I didn't go over here just because I felt it was not necessarily that interesting to most people. But there's a lot of new kind of configurable options as we've continued to make changes. So you also find the documentation for any changes we discussed in here. So you can see there's a lot of changes, lots of bug fixes and other fun little things too. So to get some free time, come in and check this out. Definitely worth always at least skimming through the release notes before you upgrade so you don't get surprised by anything. All right. With that, I'll just say, remember that in order to upgrade to 12.0, as always, in order to upgrade to any new LumenVox release, you must have a current software maintenance contract for your licenses. If you don't and you try to install the new version, you'll get errors about your maintenance has expired. So we'd recommend you double check that. If you have questions about how to check that, just let us know. Contact support@lumenvox.com, and we can help you figure out what you've got installed, what your contract is, and how to get a new one if you need it.